Picture this slowly, not as a metaphor, as a diagnosis. You wake up every morning, and before your feet touch the floor, your mind already belongs to someone else. A parent's expectation, a boss's opinion, a social rule you never agreed to but learned to obey. You don't ask, "What do I want?" You ask, "What will be acceptable?" And without realizing it, your life becomes a rented apartment, clean, functional, but never truly yours. That is the quiet tragedy most people live inside. Not failure, not poverty, but permission. A life governed by invisible referees who never show their faces yet control every move you make. You choose the safe sentence instead of the honest one, the predictable path instead of the meaningful one. You shrink, not because you are weak, but because you are watched. Or at least, you believe you are. 5 centuries ago, Machiavelli identified this exact disease long before social media, performance culture, or corporate hierarchies made it fashionable. His warning was not moral, it was surgical. A man who lives for approval does not belong to himself. He belongs to the crowd. And the crowd is the most unstable ruler in existence. Here is the illusion that traps you. You believe approval equals safety. You believe if enough people agree with you, you will be protected from regret, criticism, or failure. But approval is not armor. It is a leash. And every time you chase it, you hand the handle to someone else. Think about how this plays out in real life. The crowd praises you today because your choices mirror their values. Tomorrow, you change direction, and suddenly the applause turns into suspicion. The same mouths that clapped now whisper. The same people who supported you now question your character. Why? Because approval is conditional. It loves you only when you stay predictable. Machiavelli understood something brutal and liberating. The crowd does not reward authenticity. It rewards compliance. The moment your life stops reflecting their expectations, their approval evaporates. And if your identity is built on that approval, you collapse with it. This is why seeking validation is one of the most efficient ways to surrender control over your life. When you depend on others to confirm your worth, you allow them to edit your decisions. You begin to hesitate. You delay. You soften your edges. You abandon ideas not because they are wrong, but because they might disturb someone else's comfort. The crowd becomes a prison without bars. No guards, no locks. Just fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of standing alone. And here is the part most people refuse to face. The crowd you are trying to please is not paying attention to you nearly as much as you think. They are absorbed in their own insecurities, their own survival, their own silent battles. The judgment you fear is often a projection of your own doubt, reflected back at you. Machiavelli would say it plainly. Those people will not be there when the consequences of your life arrive. They won't wake up at 3 a.m. with your regret. They won't carry the weight of the opportunities you never pursued. They will move on, while you remain stuck in a life designed to avoid disapproval rather than create meaning. Living for yourself does not mean becoming cruel, narcissistic, or disconnected. That is a misunderstanding pushed by those who benefit from your obedience. It means shifting the source of authority. Decisions are no longer filtered through "What will they think?" but through, "Does this align with my values, my vision, my future?" This shift is terrifying at first, because it requires you to accept a truth most people spend their lives running from. Disapproval is inevitable. Someone will always be disappointed. Someone will always misunderstand you. Someone will always think you should have chosen differently. But regret that is optional. There is a profound difference between being disliked and being unfulfilled. One is external noise. The other is an internal verdict that never shuts up. Machiavelli warned that a man who avoids the first often condemns himself to the second. Think of your life as a compass. Approval spins the needle endlessly. One comment pulls you north, another drags you south. You never move forward, you just rotate. But when you live for yourself, the compass locks. The direction becomes clear, and even when the terrain is rough, you are no longer lost. Here is the metaphor Machiavelli would appreciate. Seeking validation is like trying to steer a ship by watching the waves instead of the stars. Waves are loud, immediate, emotional, but they change every second. Stars are quiet, distant, and consistent. Your values are stars. The crowd is the ocean. Most people drown because they listen to the noise instead of the navigation. When you stop performing for approval, something radical happens. Your energy consolidates. Your decisions sharpen. You no longer explain yourself to feel safe. You act, and you let reality respond. Some doors close. Others ones you didn't even know existed open. This is not rebellion. It is reclamation. You were not born to be a reflection of expectations. You were born to be a source of direction. And the moment you validate yourself internally, silently, without witnesses, you step out of the crowd's shadow and into your own authority. That is where living actually begins. Once you stop chasing approval, a deeper fear surfaces, the fear of choosing yourself without apology. This is where most people retreat. Because living for yourself is not just about ignoring the crowd. It's about confronting the guilt that appears when you put your own needs first. Guilt that was trained into you long before you had language for it. Machiavelli called this misunderstanding moral weakness. Society reframed it as virtue. You were taught that self-sacrifice makes you noble, that endurance proves character, that saying yes even when it costs you is evidence of goodness. But Machiavelli saw the long-term consequence of this programming, a population of exhausted people who confuse depletion with morality. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Constant self-denial does not make you virtuous. It makes you useful. And useful people are rarely respected. They are consumed. This is where Machiavelli introduces what modern ears mislabel as selfishness. But what he actually meant was strategic self-interest. Not indulgence. Not cruelty. But preservation. The understanding that a man who neglects his own foundation cannot sustain anything meaningful. Relationships, work, leadership, or legacy. Think of yourself as a well. Every demand placed on you draws water, time, attention, emotional labor, energy. If you never replenish the well, you don't become generous, you become dry. And when the well runs dry, what comes out is not kindness, but resentment. That resentment is subtle at first. It hides behind politeness. You still show up, you still help, but something inside hardens. You begin to feel unseen, unappreciated, used, not because others are villains, but because you train them to expect access without limits. Machiavelli understood this dynamic clearly. A man who never defends his boundaries teaches the world that his boundaries do not exist, and where there are no boundaries, there is no respect, only entitlement. Strategic selfishness begins with a simple but radical principle. Your well-being is not negotiable, not after everyone else, not when it's convenient. First, like the oxygen mask on an airplane, secure yourself or you become a liability to yourself and to everyone depending on you. Society resists this idea because it benefits from your exhaustion. An overgiving person is predictable, easily directed, easily guilted, easily controlled. But Machiavelli was not interested in saints. He studied power. And power, he observed, flows toward those who protect their energy fiercely. Look at the people who shape outcomes rather than react to them. They are not endlessly available. They are not constantly apologizing for having priorities. They guard their mornings. They defend their time. They invest in their strength physically, mentally, strategically before they distribute anything outward. This is not because they care less. It is because they understand leverage. A depleted man has no leverage. He negotiates from weakness. He agrees when he should pause. He gives when he should evaluate. He sacrifices long-term direction for short-term harmony. And harmony without strength collapses under pressure. Strategic selfishness means saying no without explanation. It means declining invitations that pull you away from your vision. It means choosing rest over appearances, growth over validation, alignment over approval. This will make some people uncomfortable, not because you are wrong, but because your boundaries expose their expectations. Here is the metaphor Machiavelli would use. Imagine lending out your sword to everyone who asks, just to prove you are generous. Eventually, when a real threat arrives, you are standing empty-handed, while others argue over who gets to keep what you gave away. Your time, focus, and energy are weapons, not for violence, but for direction. Spend them to impress others, and you disarm yourself. Invest them in yourself, and your capacity multiplies. This is the paradox Machiavelli saw clearly. True generosity comes from abundance, not sacrifice. When you are strong, rested, and fulfilled, your impact expands naturally. When you are drained, even your kindness becomes hollow. Pay attention to who resents your boundaries. It is rarely those who respect you. It is those who benefited from your lack of them. Strategic selfishness is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming solid. A man with structure. A man who does not collapse under expectation. A man whose yes means something because his no exists. When you prioritize yourself without guilt, something shifts in how others treat you. They may not like it, but they adjust. Because boundaries force recalibration. They signal self-respect, and self-respect changes the terms of every interaction. Machiavelli knew this. People treat you based on how you treat your own time, energy, and needs. Show the world they are negotiable, and the world will negotiate them away. Guard them like assets, and others will approach with caution. This is not selfishness. This is survival with intelligence. And once your foundation is protected, you are no longer pouring from an empty cup. You are building from a full one. Once you begin protecting your energy and choosing yourself deliberately, another illusion collapses. The belief that your reputation defines who you are. Machiavelli dismantled this confusion with ruthless clarity. He observed that most people spend their lives managing perception while quietly losing themselves in the process. Reputation lives in other people's minds. Identity lives in your spine. Yet modern life reverses this order. You are encouraged to curate, perform, polish, and explain. To maintain an image that keeps you acceptable, impressive, harmless. Social media didn't invent this instinct. It weaponized it. Now your worth feels publicly scored. Likes, reactions, comments. A constant referendum on who you are allowed to be. Machiavelli would call this a dangerous inversion of power. When your sense of self depends on reputation, you become fragile. Because reputation is uncontrollable. You cannot manage how others interpret your silence, your ambition, your boundaries, or your growth. Someone will misread you. Someone will project onto you. Someone will tell a story about you that has nothing to do with reality. If your identity is tied to being seen favorably, you will live in permanent defense mode, adjusting, explaining, correcting, apologizing. Exhausted not by action, but by performance. Machiavelli studied leaders closely and noticed a pattern. The most effective ones knew exactly who they were. They were grounded internally. They did not chase universal approval. They accepted polarity. Some admired them, some hated them. Most were indifferent, and none of that moved them off course. Here is the question that reveals the difference between reputation and identity. If everything people believed about you vanished tomorrow, what would remain? Your skills would remain. Your values. Your discipline. Your relationships with those who actually know you. Your character when no one is watching. That is identity. And it exists independently of applause. Most people never test this question because they are terrified of the answer. They've invested so much energy into maintaining an image that they are unsure what exists underneath it. That is why reputation becomes a cage. They must protect it at all costs, because without it, they don't know who they are. Machiavelli's insight was surgical. A man who knows his identity can survive reputational damage. A man who doesn't cannot. This is why living for yourself requires you to loosen your grip on how you are perceived. Not recklessly, not arrogantly, but intentionally. When you stop guarding your reputation obsessively, something unexpected happens. You gain freedom of movement. You take risks without asking for permission. You speak honestly without rehearsing how it will land. You fail publicly and recover privately. You experiment. You evolve. You become harder to control because your worth no longer depends on consensus. Here is the metaphor Machiavelli would appreciate. Reputation is a shadow cast by your actions. Chase the shadow, and you run in circles. Walk toward the sun, your values, and the shadow follows naturally, without effort. Ironically, this is what often builds the strongest reputation. Not perfection, not polish, but coherence. People sense when someone is aligned internally, when words match behavior, when there is no desperate need to impress. Authenticity has gravity. The most respected individuals are rarely the most liked. They are the most real. They are flawed, consistent, and unapologetic about their direction. They do not try to be everything to everyone, and because of that, they become something to someone. Living for yourself means choosing identity over image, especially when the two are in conflict. It means making decisions based on who you are becoming, not how it will look in the short term. It means allowing misunderstanding to exist without rushing to correct it. This does not mean you abandon responsibility or integrity. It means you stop confusing self-betrayal with virtue. You stop smoothing your edges so others don't feel threatened by your growth. Machiavelli would remind you, those who need you to remain small to feel comfortable were never allies. They were dependents. The moment you release the need to be perfectly understood, your nervous system relaxes. You are no longer scanning rooms for approval. You are no longer editing yourself mid-sentence. You move with clarity, and clarity over time outperforms charm. Now comes the next threshold, one that separates those who live deliberately from those who remain safely unfulfilled. The willingness to risk discomfort in exchange for meaning. Machiavelli famously wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But beneath that sentence is a deeper principle. Safety is often the most dangerous choice available. Most people choose comfort reflexively. They take the secure job instead of the uncertain opportunity. They stay in the familiar relationship instead of facing loneliness. They silence their opinions instead of risking friction. They call this stability, but it is often slow erosion. Here is the truth Machiavelli uncovered. The safe path is not safe. It merely delays exposure. The job you cling to can disappear overnight. The relationship that requires you to hide yourself corrodes your identity quietly. The silence you maintain to avoid conflict eventually erases your voice entirely. Calculated risk is not recklessness. It is courage with analysis. It is the decision to accept short-term discomfort for long-term alignment. It is moving before you feel ready, speaking before certainty arrives, acting before conditions feel perfect. Think of growth as forging steel. Comfort keeps the metal soft. Pressure hardens it. Every meaningful outcome in your life will demand that you risk something: status, approval, certainty, a previous version of yourself. The question is not whether you will risk. The question is whether you will risk intentionally for your own vision or passively for everyone else's expectations. When you choose growth over comfort, you stop living on borrowed rules. You stop waiting for permission, and you step into the role Machiavelli believed mattered most, the author of your own direction. Once you accept risk as the price of a meaningful life, another habit must die: the compulsive need to explain yourself. Machiavelli understood silence not as absence, but as authority. He observed that men who constantly justify their choices reveal insecurity, not openness. Explanation, when overused, becomes a confession of doubt. Think about how this pattern shows up. You make a decision, someone questions it, and immediately your mind goes into defense mode. You clarify, you rationalize, you provide context, you stack reasons like sandbags, hoping to protect your choice from scrutiny. But with every sentence, something subtle happens: you transfer power. You turn your life into a courtroom, and you invite everyone to be a judge. Machiavelli would say this plainly: people who respect you do not require constant justification, and people who don't respect you will never be convinced by it. Explanation in those cases is not communication, it is submission. Living for yourself means recognizing that not everyone is entitled to understand you. There is a difference between sharing your reasoning with trusted allies and defending your existence to spectators. When you blur that line, you invite interference. Powerful individuals do not narrate every move. They decide, they act, they allow results to speak. This does not make them secretive, it makes them grounded. Silence becomes a filter. Those who need explanations reveal their dependency. Those who don't reveal their alignment. Ask yourself how much energy you waste trying to be understood by people who have no stake in your future. Family members who question every deviation from the norm. Friends who resist your growth because it disrupts the version of you they are comfortable with. Acquaintances who offer opinions disguised as concern. Machiavelli would call this noise. And noise clouds judgment. Your life is not a democracy. Everyone does not get a vote. When you attempt to accommodate every perspective, you dilute your own direction until it disappears. Self-respect begins the moment you stop asking permission to exist as you are. Here is the metaphor Machiavelli would use. A king who announces every strategy before executing it is not transparent. He is defenseless. Discretion protects intent. Silence preserves leverage. When you stop explaining, something remarkable happens. The room recalibrates. People either adapt to your certainty or drift away. Both outcomes are useful. You no longer negotiate your peace. You embody it. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. It is the understanding that your inner authority does not require external validation. Now comes a harder truth, one Machiavelli did not soften. Loyalty to your vision will inevitably conflict with loyalty to people's expectations. And when that moment arrives, you must choose. Every relationship carries an unspoken contract. Your parents expect continuity. Your friends expect familiarity. Your partner expects predictability. Your workplace expects availability. Society expects conformity. And within this web of expectation, your personal vision struggles to breathe. Growth feels like betrayal to those invested in who you used to be. Machiavelli observed that many men abandon their purpose not because they lack ambition, but because they fear disappointing others. They stay in cities they have outgrown, careers that drain them, roles that no longer fit, all to preserve peace. But peace built on self-abandonment is not peace. It is paralysis. Choosing loyalty to your vision means accepting discomfort up front instead of regret later. It means having conversations that begin with honesty instead of apology. I love you, but I cannot live your version of my life. That sentence alone reshapes power dynamics. Some people will adjust, others will resist. A few will exit. This is not cruelty. It is sorting. Machiavelli understood that purpose demands sacrifice, but not of integrity. The sacrifice is illusion. The illusion that you can evolve without friction. The illusion that everyone will celebrate your growth. The illusion that alignment is painless. Here is the metaphor. Imagine carrying a map that leads you out of a maze, but every person around you insists on staying lost because it feels familiar. If you follow them, you remain trapped. If you follow the map, you walk alone at least for a while. The people who truly care about you will want you to reach the exit, even if it changes the relationship. The ones who only care about access will fight to keep you inside. Machiavelli would tell you this. Your vision is sacred. It is the architecture of your potential. When you betray it to satisfy expectations, you do not become kind. You become compliant. Living for yourself requires the courage to disappoint in the short term, to honor yourself in the long term. It requires choosing purpose over comfort, direction over approval, truth over convenience. And this choice leads to one final test, the acceptance that you will be misunderstood. At some point, if you are truly living for yourself, misunderstanding becomes unavoidable, not occasional, structural. Machiavelli himself was misunderstood for centuries, labeled cruel, cynical, immoral by people who never bothered to read him carefully. He understood something most people learn too late. Misunderstanding is not a mistake in authentic living. It is the cost of it. The moment you stop performing a simplified version of yourself, people lose their ability to categorize you comfortably. And when people cannot categorize you, they become uneasy. They reach for labels. They tell stories. They project motives that feel safer than admitting they don't fully understand you anymore. This is where most people break. They soften their ambition so it doesn't look arrogant. They hide their boundaries so they don't appear selfish. They dilute their standards so they don't seem judgmental. They perform clarity for others at the expense of truth for themselves. Machiavelli would call this self-erasure. Authentic living demands that you accept a hard reality. Some people will misunderstand you no matter how carefully you explain. They will filter your actions through their fears, their insecurities, their worldview. You cannot out-communicate that. Trying to will only trap you in endless correction. Here is the pattern. Your confidence is called arrogance. Your silence is called coldness. Your independence is called selfishness. Your ambition is called greed. Your standards are called cruelty. And if you retreat from each accusation, adjusting yourself to avoid it, you eventually become unrecognizable to yourself. Machiavelli understood that explanation has diminishing returns. Beyond a certain point, Clarity of character matters more than clarity of communication. The people who matter will see you over time. The people who don't were never listening anyway. Think about the individuals you admire most. They are rarely universally loved. They are polarizing. Some people resonate deeply with them. Others reject them entirely. That polarity is not a flaw. It is evidence of a strong identity. The most forgettable people are not misunderstood. They are perfectly understood and irrelevant. Your willingness to be misunderstood is directly proportional to your freedom. The more you require universal understanding, the smaller your life becomes. The more you accept misinterpretation as part of the path, the more space you gain to move honestly. This is not permission to be reckless or inconsiderate. It is permission to stop editing your soul for mass approval. Now comes the final layer of Machiavelli's warning, one that ties everything together. Control over your time. Time is not a resource. It is your life, converted into hours. When you live for others, you donate pieces of your life in socially acceptable ways. Obligations you resent, conversations that drain you, commitments that exist solely to avoid disappointment. None of these feel dramatic in isolation. Together, they consume decades. Machiavelli would find modern people astonishing. We protect money aggressively, but surrender time casually. We negotiate salaries fiercely, but allow our schedules to be dictated by guilt, habit, and expectation. Look honestly at your week. How much of it is aligned with your values and goals, and how much exists because saying no felt uncomfortable? Every hour spent on what does not matter to you is an hour removed from what does. This is not philosophy. It is arithmetic. Time spent pleasing others is time not spent building your life. Living for yourself means treating time as sacred, not optimized, but aligned. You stop asking, "Is this efficient?" and start asking, "Is this truthful?" Because when you say yes to what doesn't matter, you lie to yourself about what does. The most fulfilled people are not the busiest. They are the most selective. They cancel without guilt. They say no frequently. They protect long stretches of solitude and focus, not because they are selfish, but because they understand that meaningful creation requires uninterrupted attention. Your deathbed will not reward you for being agreeable. It will not congratulate you for maintaining appearances. It will ask one question: did you live your life, or did you manage expectations? This leads to Machiavelli's final and most liberating instruction. Define success on your own terms. Success borrowed from society is a trap. You can climb perfectly and still end up exhausted, hollow, misaligned. Promotions, titles, possessions, none of these mean anything if they were never your definition to begin with. Maybe success for you is time, or autonomy, or creative freedom, or depth instead of scale. But admitting that invites judgment. So people chase someone else's scoreboard and wonder why winning feels empty. Machiavelli observed this pattern relentlessly. The men who appeared most successful were often the most miserable. They won games they never wanted to play for audiences they didn't respect. Living for yourself requires brutal honesty. Write down what success means to you, not what sounds impressive, not what earns approval, what actually fills you with meaning. Then compare that to how you are living now. The gap between the two is the cost of living for others. Closing that gap will cost you comfort, misunderstanding, and some relationships. But it will buy you something rare: coherence. A life that makes sense from the inside. Machiavelli was never teaching cruelty. He was teaching authorship, that your life does not belong to the crowd, That approval is a terrible compass. That self-respect requires the courage to choose your own direction. You have one life, not a rehearsal, not a draft. The question is not whether you understand this. The question is whether you will finally act like it.